Good evening, everybody. I'm Paul Johnson. I'm the co-chair of the South Wales and West of England branch. Very pleased to be here with you all tonight with Akrim from Atkins, who's here to talk to us about enhancing the Network Rail digital twin capability. Before I hand over to Akrim, I've just got a couple of key notes I want to push out, please. We will be sending evaluation sheets out after the event, so please do respond to let us know your thoughts, but also to indicate what other events you'd like to hear about in the future. Throughout the event, I'm sure you'll think of questions as well, so please do pop them in the chat function on the site, and our host Rob Allen will then put these to Akrim at the end of the session. Just a brief update from an APM perspective as well. We are starting to plan for physical events now, which is hopefully good news for people on the webinar. Obviously, we're going to continue with webinars as well and start to introduce physical events in parallel with the webinars as well, just to see what type of feedback that we get. In the meantime, please do peruse the APM website. Lots of learning on there, lots of networking opportunities. It also does highlight the forthcoming events as well, gives you the opportunity to sign up to them. Just a quick insight into those events coming forward. We've got a webinar on the 15th of Feb around Tamar Bridge, which is based in Cornwall, so that's a webinar. On the 24th of February, we've then got a webinar entitled Agile, Is It Worth the Risk? This is hosted by Barbara Roberts, who's an expert in all things Agile. The next event on the 16th of March is the first physical event that we're trying now for the last 2 years. So this will be hosted at Atkins, and the focus is on the Natural Resources Wales company, also the government department, which is all about their journey of establishing a new PMO in the public sector. So please, if you are interested in coming to a physical event and having the networking, please do take a look at that one. On the 30th of March, we've got a virtual networking event hosted by Nina Hartley from the committee. The topic is going to be based on Women's International Day, which is on the 8th of March. In early April, we're planning a one-day seminar focused on kicking your project off on the right track. Again, that'll be the next physical event hosted at Barwar in Bristol. Just want to give a final nod as well to one out in June, quite far out. There's a unique topic looking at the mental well-being based on project kind of delivery in the workplace as well. And this will be a joint event with the Midlands branch based up in Cheltenham. Okay, just while people are listening as well, we do want to host more webinar events, like we say, but we are absolutely missing the chance to network with our members, kind of get the buffet going and a chat before and after the events like we used to. Okay, so that's it from me in terms of highlights. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Akrim, who's a principal consultant at Atkins. He's going to be talking about the 3-year project, all about the capture of high-resolution aerial imagery for the British Rail network. Over to you, Akrim.
Hi, thank you, Paul. Thank you for the warm introduction. I'm going to turn my video off, I think, just focus on the slides. Right then. In terms of contents of the presentation today, I'm going to start with a disclaimer, talk a little bit about me in terms of my background. Normally within Atkins, we start with an EDI or a security or safety moment. So I think we'll start a presentation with one of those, give you a bit of an overview of the client that we work for, Network Rail, and then the Intelligent Infrastructure Programme, where the aerial survey project sat, and then actually talk about the aerial survey project itself, then really focus on some of the challenges we had in terms of stakeholder management, and hopefully that will then feed nicely into kind of some of the drivers for success, and then hopefully that would also nicely lead into the kind of questions and discussion for later on as well. Okay. So just in terms of a disclaimer, all the opinions expressed in this talk are my opinions. Essentially, they don't represent the views of APM or Network Rail. So a little bit about background about me. I currently work at Atkins Digital Asset Management Practice. I'm principal consultant and project manager. Have about 20 years of experience within the transportation and utilities sector, principally in bid and project management. Worked with a range of clients during that time. Some of the kind of notable ones are Network Rail, which we'll talk about today, Highways England, who are now actually National Highways, Department for Transport, HS2 and local authorities. Okay, in terms of just starting with a security moment, There's obviously heightened tensions in Europe at the moment with the kind of issues in Russia and with Ukraine in Europe. There was a publication issued by, or a press release issued by UK National Cybersecurity Centre, highlighting the increased risk of cyber attacks. And they've advised organisations, especially organisations which work with government organisations, to kind of ensure that they remind their staff about security, ensuring we make use of strong passwords when we access systems, and also making sure that we're on the lookout for things like phishing attacks, etc. So it's probably a good reminder for everyone. Network rail into context. They have to manage a significant amount of assets kind of listed there. And a lot of these are aging assets, which have a huge impact on the running of the railway and the impact it has on freight and customer users. So really maintaining these assets to a high level and ensuring that they identify and predict when some of these are going to fail and undertake preventative maintenance is hugely important. And I think some of the significant figures there are, Network Rail, the infrastructure kind of supports or facilitates 4.8 million journeys a day. So quite a huge number, and has a big impact on the UK economic prosperity as well, and connectivity for a lot of people. In terms of just highlighting how Network Rail is organised, so they're split up into 5 regions and 14 routes. And each region is empowered to make decisions about its maintenance decisions. And the aim really is that having that local knowledge is aimed at improving performance, because you understand the nature of your network and know its needs, and actually can respond to the maintenance challenges it faces. So intelligent infrastructure, just thought I'd talk a little bit about the program before we get into the aerial survey project. It's a 5-year program. It's about, as you've heard, focusing on using data more intelligently to help Network Rail better manage their assets. In so doing, trying to improve the kind of rail outcomes in terms of journeys and reliability for customers and freight users, but also actually reducing things like service affecting failures, which are penalties that Network Rail have to pay if their assets fail, and they pay these to train operating companies and customers essentially. So what they're really aiming to do is move through better information, move to a predict and prevent maintenance regime. So really identifying faults in their assets before they actually become faults, and take action to address them. Coming on to the aerial survey project, which supported enhancing Network Rail's digital twin capability. So we were tasked with capturing circa 17,000 kilometers of aerial survey network coverage across the UK. We were tasked with capturing high resolution photographic imagery and LiDAR data, essentially using helicopters, as you can see in the image, and as you saw in the video as well. This was only the second time that a national survey had been conducted, and the original one was actually conducted in summer. And the survey we were asked to undertake was in winter, which was more challenging due to kind of inclement weather and poor light conditions, or shorter days as well. So we worked with a range of different stakeholders, both within Network Rail, with outside suppliers, and other teams that were brought in terms of business change specialists, etc., to kind of undertake this 3-year program. The original plan was to deliver this over 2 years, but because of the onset of COVID, we added an additional season onto the program to complete the project. In parallel with this project, Atkins also were tasked with making use of that aerial survey data to develop a number of proof of concepts to kind of demonstrate the value of that data, combining it in different ways to bring new insights to help maintenance activities. So this slide just really outlines some of the key outputs of the project. So the first picture there on the left-hand side obviously shows aerial photography to a high resolution. The next one shows the kind of LiDAR data that's been collected. So this is essentially kind of a laser scanning of the ground surface, building up points, which then allow you to build up digital models. And the next two show the kind of digital terrain and surface models that Network Rail required. The difference being is one creates a digital image of the ground surface without any objects on it, and the next one, the surface model, creates the same image but with objects like things like trees, buildings, etc. on it. So why was the aerial survey project undertaken? So really, this can be split up into two parts. One was to support day-to-day operations. Aerial survey data is used by about 25,000 users in Network Rail, and it's used for a variety of things, right from planning works, identifying access points on the rail network, identifying risks. Also, when things go wrong in terms of things like earthwork failures or derailments, it's also using that data to understand the conditions around those accident spots and what may have caused and led to those issues. It's also used to kind of validate assets in terms of their location as well. And secondly, more importantly, what intelligent infrastructure was trying to do was capture this data and then provide it to a range of different work streams and projects to enable them to build new decision support tools to help with that predictive analytics piece that we talked about. And ultimately, the aerial survey data plays a really important part in Network Rail's digital twin. It's probably worth touching upon the digital twin here as well. Within Network Rail, there's a range of different digital twins being used. And when we're talking about a digital twin, we're basically saying replicating the physical world in a virtual environment where you can play around with it, can model how assets may fail over time, and then using that knowledge to apply it to the real world. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about a digital twin. In terms of how we were structured, so there were a number of kind of portfolios and work streams across the Intelligent Infrastructure Program. The aerial survey project formed part of the kind of civils portfolio, if you like. We had a small core team that's highlighted in purple, working with business change teams, and then a variety of other functions within Network Rail, which are highlighted in blue there. And then also working with suppliers to kind of capture that data essentially as well. This slide just demonstrates in terms of the bandwidth of capture, if you like. So we were capturing circa 60 meters either side of the kind of outer rail tracks. In some cases, it was wider than that, and it was really dependent on the network ownership boundary. All the data was then presented in OS tiles, 500 meters by 500 meter tiles, and essentially that amounted to about 46,000 tiles. Okay, next couple of slides just demonstrate some of the outputs and why we undertook the survey in winter months. So over the winter, you get reduced vegetation, which allows the LiDAR scanning to penetrate through shrubs more effectively. So it allows us to build up a better quality image of the ground surface and assets as well, and a better picture essentially. This slide here demonstrates the kind of quality that you get. So this is just made up of those LiDAR kind of points, so they can build up a digital profile of the ground surface and the objects on it. This slide looks at the digital terrain model, which is one of the outputs of the LiDAR survey. And as you can see, on the left-hand side is a winter survey, right-hand side is a summer survey. You can see the level of detail and features you can detect on a winter survey are far superior to a summer survey. So it really does kind of allow you to get better definition for designers and for maintenance operatives about what they're looking at. And in many cases, it means that, they don't have to go on site. Some of that data, they can make decisions off the data itself. This image here shows how the aerial survey and LiDAR data can be kind of used in different applications to build cross sections. So for designers and maintenance engineers, it's kind of useful because they can identify things like access points where they're going to park, where they're going to locate equipment. So identify risks that are going to be posed with undertaking maintenance activities. So you could see that, for example, in this particular case, the slopes are quite steep on either side as well, and you can see other objects and obstructions that may impede doing some of that maintenance work. This slide just presents kind of the high-level summary or overview of the project, so end-to-end. So right at the outset, we worked with Network Rail teams, with the suppliers to specify the specification for data capture, and then we helped mobilize those suppliers. We also, as part of that mobilization phase, worked with the suppliers to understand what their quality plans were, to test some of their sample data, and to actually clarify the level of quality we were expecting. So that exercise was time consuming, but it was a really fascinating insight into some of the issues and challenges we were going to face, and they were kind of nipped in the bud, if you like, in terms of really clarifying, what was acceptable, what wasn't acceptable. We then work with the suppliers to capture that data, and that data was processed overseas in India. That data was then returned in batches where the aerial team undertook the quality assurance of it, undertaking things like test witnessing sessions, spot checks, dealing with queries and anomalies. And then we made recommendations to Network Rail to either approve or reject that data. If it was rejected, then it had to be reflown and recaptured by the supplier. Once it had been approved, or each batch of data was approved, we work with various teams in Network Rail, Asset Information Services, and the Route Services IT team to ensure that data was checked, it was staged, and it was ready for go live. And in between those stages, we also work with the business change team to develop the communications to clearly highlight to users what data they were going to receive, when they were going to receive it, and the coverage that it was going to cover within their kind of regions, essentially. Once everybody was agreed, and with the go live date, the data was pushed out into the GIS systems, communications went out alerting people that the new data was there. And then any queries associated with those data, we would then dealt with that, essentially. So that really summarized the kind of overall end-to-end process that we undertook. This slide here just goes into a little bit more detail about some of the quality assurance activities that we undertook. And I think I can cover this in the questions if anybody's got it later on. This slide highlights some of the key deliverables that we were required to produce. These are over and above the kind of normal project artifacts that you'd produce, like the PIDs and the progress reports and the RAID logs. So the key thing, the key deliverable here was around providing that data to the required specification, making sure all the kind of test witnessing and spot check reports and certificates and approvals were provided to have an audit trail of all the data. And then essentially also undertaking a lessons learned exercise, which is vital for future surveys, and ensuring all that data was available through the GIS or GeoRhythm viewer application, where data is accessed through. Also, that was another important feature was a technical query register. So any technical queries that were raised during the course of the project were captured within that and then provided to the client. So in terms of outcomes then, the project was delivered on time. We hit all our milestones. We won a range of industry awards throughout the 3 years. So we were able to provide and hit our target of 17,000 kilometers of data. The data was delivered to agreed thresholds, quality thresholds rather. We were able to deliver the project under budget, saving the client money. Our support in terms of transitioning the project into business as usual was also recognized, and actually the amount of effort we put into that helped us to close down the project kind of very efficiently and resulting in excellent customer and client feedback. And I think personally for me, it's been a huge learning experience working in such an environment with so many stakeholders in such a kind of high profile program as well. So a real kind of plus for me. The next few slides just demonstrate the kind of amount of data that we captured across each region, and then also I've broken that down by route as well. So that's the kind of data that we captured essentially. And the kind of black lines on the map show the coverage of that data essentially. Okay, what did really focus on the kind of stakeholder management challenges that we faced. Hopefully these will resonate with many of you on the call, and I'll just pick out a couple that were significant to me. I think initially I came into this project about 12 months in. The project was kind of handed over to me at short notice, with the previous manager having to go or having decided to leave the organization. So I'm sure many of you have been in a situation where you've had to take a project at short notice, and trying to get to grips with the large number of stakeholders, their roles, their expectations, their needs was quite a uphill challenging, it was an uphill challenge really. What really helped was the quality of handover actually. The outgoing PM had documented a lot of the kind of stakeholders, and that was really useful as a reference point for me to kind of build on essentially. Going into a program like intelligent infrastructure, which is kind of a multi-supply complex environment, was, it was quite daunting actually. I remember turning up on the first day in London, looking around me, and there was kind of, people from all sorts of organizations running around, big kind of posters on the wall, and just, trying to get to grips and trying to understand, what your role was within this whole kind of program was, it seemed daunting at the time. But as you ease your way into it, you start to make the links and the relationships, and your role and the dependencies with different kind of teams, essentially. And I think one of the biggest kind of challenges I also faced was client expectations. So the project had been going for 12 months, and then delivered the initial phase or initial season of data to huge success. So trying to emulate that success seemed like an uphill struggle. It seemed like the kind of outgoing project manager built some real fantastic relationships. They were thought of in a really kind of well thought of essentially. So trying to emulate that, I think was quite daunting. You sometimes feel that you're almost set up for failure, but actually one of the things that you find is you revert to the kind of your own personality on the project, and you build those relationships from scratch, but obviously building upon the kind of great work that already been done. I think one thing that will probably resonate with lots of people is things like the kind of stakeholder tensions you get within projects. And the II program is no different. So there's legacy kind of politics between various network rail teams. There were challenges with different suppliers that you needed to deal with. So a lot of time was spent on communications, which helped identify risks, helped identify tensions, and then helped actually resolve those as well. I think a big thing for me as well, the II program, in terms of its language delivery model, was again challenging. It was also quite dynamic. So over the 3 years, it radically transformed as they looked to kind of improve the way they delivered things. So it's hugely challenging because you're constantly the kind of types of reports you're asked to provide constantly change. The level of detail and the types of stakeholders you have to communicate again change. So it can be off-putting. It almost distracts you from like the actual day-to-day delivery, because you feel that it's quite bureaucratic, but you also have to kind of understand the kind of context of where you're working and the demands for that information for different people. And I think one of the key things for me that was a plus point was, I think, working closely with the PMO to feed back some of our frustrations and concerns was really important, because they actually were addressed. So that some of the level of reporting, for example, was refined over time, which meant that it was less onerous actually, and it was more efficient in the long run. Working in a cramped office, the II program started ramping up quite quickly after the first 12 months. And actually going into the office environment, was really difficult, because trying to get a desk was really difficult. Trying to create those relationships, face-to-face relationships with people, and getting access to people was hard, and meeting rooms. So the pandemic in some ways was actually quite useful, because it forced everybody to kind of work remotely, and having force everybody to kind of touch base remotely. So it actually worked in our favor in this particular instance. I think transitioning from an independent work stream into a portfolio was a huge challenge on the aerial survey project, where you had a stakeholder who had the whole history of the project, understood what you were doing. When we moved into a portfolio, suddenly we had a different set of stakeholders who were asking a lot of fundamental questions, and you had to go over lots of old ground. And luckily, the project's well documented, so some of the kind of decisions we had made and having to go back through various artifacts was, because they were well documented, we were able to kind of address that quite quickly. I think working with the suppliers over the winter month was, hugely pressurized, because there was huge expectations on capturing the data. And one of the things we learned throughout the process was that, you start at kind of middle of November and you were trying to complete by March of the following year in terms of the kind of winter period of capture. And what we were finding is we weren't capturing much data between, say, November and Christmas because of kind of poor weather and because of short daylight hours. And the data was really ramping up and coming in kind of like February and March essentially. But that made the client nervous. So managing those expectations, having those mitigations, and trying to create that confidence was really important with the various stakeholders. And I think the COVID pandemic also brought in a whole load of new stakeholders because there was reputational risk if anything happened. Whilst people caught COVID, for example, there were obviously deaths during the first wave. So there's a real risk that we were sending out potential suppliers in an unsafe environment, and what reputational damage that could have caused Network Rail. And I think mutually, Network Rail and the suppliers came to decision that we would pause and then add in another season, which was the right thing to do. So I'll touch upon some of the drivers for success then, and some of these relate to stakeholder management or indirectly kind of influenced it. I think one of the most important and fundamental kind of drivers for success was the quality management approach we adopted. And we really spent a lot of time at the outset of the project trying to learn lessons from the 2014 survey, even though that was done over several months. We devised an approach where we got the suppliers to self-assure their kind of quality of work in terms of what the quality of data they were providing us. And at the outset, that seemed like, quite a risk. But one of the things that we did add into the kind of agreements was arrangements for warranties. So they actually provided a warranty on the data where if the data was rejected, they would have to fly that data or refly that data at their own risk, which was a huge cost to them. So there was a huge incentive on them to make sure that the data was right from the outset, and that worked really well. Because as we went through the project, the instances of anomalies with the data arising, were quite reduced, and the suppliers got to a point where they were actually providing data which was right first time, which was really positive for the project. I think taking on a hands-on approach, leading from the front, made a real difference. I remember attending meetings where no one actually said anything, so we had all the kind of key partners or stakeholders involved, and no one would say anything. And, it was quite daunting because you think, are people not saying anything because they have nothing to say or they're happy with the kind of performance? And I quickly learned that I needed to drive the agenda for those meetings. So doing a lot of prep beforehand, speaking to stakeholders and stuff. And then within the meetings, trying to be more engaging, trying to pull people into conversations and stuff to really get a sense of, were they happy with the decisions we were making and where they were on board. So I think that worked really well. I think improved technology between 2014 and 2018 made a difference as well. So the quality of cameras and sensors had improved. So that kind of supported the quality of data we received. I think capturing and making use of lessons learned. And I know it's one of these things is a bit of a cliche that, it's important that we have to capture them and use them. But I think we were lucky on this project in the sense that you were repeating an approach 3 times. And so you were really able to make use of lessons learned between one season and the next, and it was directly comparable. So things that worked in one season, were built upon in the following season, and things that didn't work were issues that you were able to address, and you could see if the change had worked. So that worked really well, I think. I think more joined up working as a team across the stakeholders, really helped ensure we had a lean team, not a very big team, but we managed that process really well with clear kind of distinctive roles and responsibilities. And I think that was really positive. It meant that, we had a clear idea that there was not too much overlap between different functions. I think one of the big lessons that Network Rail had learned from previous transformation programs was about communications, about bringing in users for the changes they were trying to make. So they're quite deliberate in trying to communicate the program as a change program rather than a technology program. And I think that worked because a lot of effort was put into the comms and making sure that the comms were tailored to the kind of final audience. So for example, the users and the route teams, constantly keeping them abreast of, you know, the progress we were making and when we were going to make the data drops and stuff. And that was really well received. I think regular progress meetings with all the stakeholders was really important, even if meetings were short, because, you know, you could get through agendas quite quickly. There wasn't much to say. Having that regular touch point in the diary was really, really important, because it meant that you could identify risks early and address them, essentially. And I think also having that frequency of meetings meant that, you know, agenda items from one meeting can, outputs from one meeting could almost form the agenda items for the kind of following meeting, so which created that continuity. I think the right forms of communication at the agreed frequencies as well. So tailoring how you manage each meeting worked really well. So the level of detail, for instance, and the length of the meetings and the number of stakeholders or types of stakeholders you had within there. Over time, we refined that, and that worked really well. And I think finally, I think just the exceptional team effort from everybody to kind of address some of the challenges we faced. I think the biggest one was around the COVID and different ways of working. So we had to adapt very quickly. So for instance, one of the key deliverables was getting data delivered on disks for each batch of data. Because of COVID, no one was in the offices to receive that data. And it was also a risk of, you know, having data disks potentially being passed between people that could potentially lead to COVID infections. We then transitioned to delivering data online and through various repositories. We also were undertaking spot checks at at the suppliers' offices, but quickly we found that that wasn't feasible because of the COVID risk. So we reverted to doing those remotely, and that worked really well. I think that covers for the drivers for success. I mentioned some of the kind of R&D projects that we also undertook. So when we talk about digital twin, so one of the key projects that was delivered, and it's quite in a mature state, it's about to be released in Network Rail, is about vegetation encroachment. So using data analytics, developing algorithms, using aerial survey data combined with forward-facing video, we were able to create a decision tool which kind of predicted how vegetation would grow and when it would actually impact the network. And it basically allows maintenance teams to kind of, you know, look forward over a period of time and see where they would need to cut back vegetation before it actually, got to that point where it could lead to accidents or impact assets, essentially. So that's one of the big kind of areas. The range of other kind of proof of concepts we undertook. One was around identifying trampolines in gardens which were adjacent to railway lines. The proof of concept was just really trying to test that could you train an AI engine to identify a trampoline, because they had a risk of these trampolines flying over, say in winter months, being blown over onto railway lines. So they could potentially identify trampolines and write to those households and provide them with kits to secure their trampolines and stuff. So that was another proof of concept that was developed. Right, I think I'm going to stop there, probably said enough, and take any questions, Rob.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing. Let me just have a look, see what questions we've got going. So we've got one from Catherine, who has asked, what were your key learnings from this project, and what are you going to take into your next one?
All right, okay, fantastic. I think one of the real key learnings that I took was, because there was so much information, so many different meetings, I needed to find a mechanism where I could record notes easily. I started to use OneNote on this project specifically, and I found it really invaluable as a kind of an audit trail of capturing notes and actions and stuff, and setting kind of agendas for kind of forthcoming meetings. And that's something I've actually used on other projects since then. So I think that's been really, really important for me. I think another key learning is working with stakeholders. Often you get cryptic messages or emails coming back to you, and picking up the phone is often the best option to resolve that, rather than create a huge email chain. And there were so many instances where you're tempted just to write back on email, but I'm glad I didn't. I picked up the phone to speak to someone, and you nipped an issue in the bud. And I think that's something I've definitely taken on board as well. So really using the right kind of mechanism of communication for your stakeholder, I think is really important.
Excellent, thank you. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to submit them via your control panel. I've definitely got a couple here, so I'll read those out.
Okay.
So Ashok has asked, has a LIDA survey been done by strapping a camera to the front of a train before? He says it seems like a cheap and easy win to aid with the aerial data. Was that considered, if not already done?
No, the Network Rail do carry out surveys like that already. They have cameras mounted on trains, which they call forward-facing videos, and that's kind of used through an application called Route Viewer. The problem with that data is not GIS referenced. The aerial survey is GIS mapped. So, and you can take measurement points off that data, whereas with the kind of forward-facing video, it's quite difficult to do. But what they are increasingly starting to do is use both data sets to merge them together. So I mentioned with the vegetation encroachment tool, they're actually combining both sets of data to kind of reach that kind of outcome. So yeah, they already do that. But it's used for very different purposes, yeah.
Oh, perfect. And just following on from that, with the LIDA data, what altitude was the helicopter at? Do you know that at all?
I couldn't tell you. I could find out, but I couldn't tell you offhand.
Okay, perfect. So it wasn't as close as like a James Bond film with the helicopter chasing.
No, I don't think so.
And then following on, this sort of data is likely to become obsolete quite quickly, with vegetation growth changing the usual of the data. Do you believe, or how long do you reckon the data will be updated?
I think when they undertook the first survey for Orbis, that they felt that the data could last 2 or 3 years in terms of useful life, and then it needed to be refreshed. So as part of the project, we did make recommendations to Network Rail in terms of how they could undertake future surveys more efficiently. The big challenge they have is trying to undertake a survey of that size, over a constrained seasonal window. It's really dependent on weather conditions, so it's really hard to do. So one of the things that they're looking at is whether they should break up that survey to do, rather to cramp that survey into like 3 seasons, where you gradually do it over your ongoing survey kind of throughout the year, so you target certain regions. So they're looking into that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Essentially data like that is almost out of date as soon as you captured it, but what they've realized now, the value of that data they're getting creates a business case for future surveys. So they are looking at that now.
Excellent, thank you. And Ashok's just followed it up with, would it be a cheaper option to use a drone next time, or a different type of technology?
Yeah, they have considered drones, and they do make use of drones, but for a large scale survey of this type, it's actually more cost effective to use helicopters. With all the kind of safety and risk considerations as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Ewan has asked, what's the appetite for change within the organisation, and how did this impact the adoption to business as usual? And then he shared, my organisation has a similar digital twin project for our assets, where confidence in this approach is low. Do you have any lessons learned to approach this from your project?
Yeah, I think we were quite lucky in the sense that because the aerial survey data was already being used by the organization, people saw the kind of value of that data on a day-to-day basis. And when we were able to then use that data as a kind of enhanced digital twin, it just enhanced the capabilities of what they were able to do. So I think we're quite lucky in the sense that we've had a kind of ready-made audience which is receptive to that change, because they had been making use of that data. I can understand, the point that where you're trying to create a change right from the outset, people are hesitant to adopt new ways of working. So it is a challenge. I think our circumstances were slightly different, but I think also one of the key things that Network Rail have learned is that, with a technology program, you don't badge it as a technology program, you badge it as a change program. So there's a lot of effort that's gone into consulting with different rail unions and stuff, because one of the concerns obviously is that when you start bringing new tools that automate certain things, it has an impact on people's roles. So it's really alleviating those questions and consulting with people to understand what that impact means for them. So I think that's a really, really important point, that you have to take people along this journey.
Excellent, thank you. And there's some comments coming in saying thank you very much for sharing knowledge and answering the questions as well. Ewan's very quick on the keyboard, just said thanks very much as well.
Thank you. Cheers.
Jai Pinner has asked, has National Railways seen an impact from this project?
Network Rail.
Yes.
Yes.
No, sorry. Has National Railways seen an impact? So I'm taking it more as National Railways. But oh, sorry. Thank you. Quickly clarified. Has Network Rail, seen an impact of this project?
Impact, yes, most definitely, through the proof of concept they developed, but also in terms of benefits as well. So I think we did a high level kind of benefits exercise, and for every £1 they spend on a national aerial survey, they get a return of £2 or £3, and that's just a conservative estimate. And then when you calculate the indirect benefits, when you capture those in terms of things like safety, less time needed to be on site, etc., it's hugely, it's hugely valuable for them. Yeah, and it's actually seen as a critical resource now across the organisation as well.
Excellent, and thanks for clarifying the question for us as well.
Okay.
With it being a portfolio, did you have a benefits baseline, and will the benefits be measured against the baseline, assuming a baseline has been achieved?
I think a really good question, and quite an interesting one. This project, the aerial survey project, was actually started with a zero benefits case, and the rationale behind it was seen as a no-brainer. It was a fundamental data source that the different II projects were going to make use of. It was an early start project, which meant actually that it actually started well before the II program was actually established properly with all the other functions. So it was started early deliberately because they needed this data set to enable some of the other projects. So I mentioned the benefits exercise as well. So whilst it was kind of started as a zero benefits exercise, they envisaged that each project that would make use of that data in innovative ways would capture the benefits, and they did have a baseline. So they were recording those as they were going along. We did that high-level benefits exercise just to demonstrate to stakeholders of the value of the data in terms of, just a kind of quite quick and dirty exercise. But yeah, you're right. There were baselines for all the other projects that were going to make use of that data. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. And Paul, I've unmuted you. So
yeah, thanks, Rob.
Hear you. Apologies for that. Paul, did you have any further questions or?
I was wondering actually that if different industries could maybe apply the digital twin approach that you've described, Akrim. I've often heard it mentioned in defence. I was just wondering if you were aware of it being used in a broader context or in a different context than what you've described.
Yeah, digital twin is, I guess you have to be a little bit careful. I think some clients are actually quite sick of the term digital twin because it's almost become like big data as a term, and everybody's banding it about, and it actually means different things to a lot of different people. But I think when you take away the term and try to understand what you're trying to achieve, it's you're trying to recreate the kind of physical world, model it in kind of a virtual world to enable you to help you make decisions in the future. And from an Atkins experience, we're starting to work with a range of clients, both within the nuclear, defense and water sectors, to kind of make use of digital twins. And I think that the key thing with digital twin is that often there's lots of different digital twins for different purposes. It's very hard at this stage. I think rarely seen one digital twin project, that covers a platform for others, but it will come. But yeah, at the moment, I think it's used in kind of almost tactical kind of solutions, if you like.
Thank you.
Excellent. A further question has come in. What were the major risks you had to put mitigation plans to, if you're able to share?
Yeah, so big risk were around the capture of the data. So as I mentioned, it was a winter survey, so trying to get helicopters out was a real challenge, especially when you had poor weather, poor daylight conditions. Those were a real struggle. So one of the things we had to do was put mitigations in place towards the back end of the kind of season. So what we worked with the supplier in doing was set up or have available additional helicopters to capture the data. And as part of the season one, what we tried to do was to kind of reduce the risk. We used two suppliers. So we gave a part of the country to one supplier and another part to another organization. And that was really to mitigate those risks. Once we got into season 2 and 3, we felt that we could actually do it with one supplier because they really got to grips with the quality of the data and stuff, and they were pretty confident in what they could deliver. So that was some of the key mitigations. In terms of when the COVID outbreak hit, we looked at a range of different mitigations for staff welfare. So in terms of isolating the pilots from other people, so there's less chance of them getting infected with COVID. We also had ground crews. So in terms of ensuring the GIS mapping and and getting that accurate, you had ground teams. Again, getting things like welfare facilities for them proved challenging. So we had to kind of ensure that they were ordered in advance, so they were able to book hotels. And remember, during the COVID pandemic, a lot of hotels were closing down and places to eat. So simple things like that. So really making sure that we could address some of those concerns. And then in terms of some of the other mitigations I talked about, in terms of transfer of those hard disks, because we couldn't physically accept those disks, we had to find a different mechanism of transferring that data. So we worked with a supplier, Network Rail, to come up with a platform that those could be transferred to. So those are some of the risks really. And then obviously changing kind of physical meetings to virtual meetings and trying to ensure they were still as effective as kind of physical meetings is what we've kind of really focused on.
Excellent, thank you. Mark submitted a question of 2 parts. As the stakeholder landscape changed, how often did you revisit your stakeholder map? In addition, did you use your stakeholder map to identify different approaches to engaging with stakeholders, e.g. to address stakeholders with a low interest?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of it was right from the outset, we created a stakeholder map that was revisited at least once a quarter, if not more, depending on the circumstances. Some stakeholders were very, very interested in the project, and some weren't. So, for example, there was a number of range of meetings or forums that were set up. Often, the ones where there wasn't an interest, there was no interest in attending those. So we adapted our approach all the way through. In terms of the comms, we looked for regular feedback from the stakeholders to ensure that the kind of information we were providing was the right information, i.e. it was useful for them. We spent a lot of time in terms of tailoring that information to different audiences. So, for example, the GRV users, the briefing packs that we produced were really kind of, although they were quite simplistic, a lot of effort went to making sure that they were really hit the mark, gave all the users what they needed. In terms of like the forward programs of data drops, making sure we really set expectations. So I guess, yeah, so we did regularly review the stakeholder map and the approaches. And I think on that was at the kind of project level. At a program level, they constantly changed how they were kind of communicating to the various stakeholders as well, always constantly refining that as well. So that was kind of something that then was fed into at a project level as well.
Excellent, thank you. Phil's asked, did you appreciate the outgoing PM's well-documented project? And are you more mindful of continuing this on for your future projects? And then Phil said it's given him food for thought, so thank you.
Yeah, most definitely. I think without that initial, because it was such a short handover, we're talking about like, I think it was like 2 weeks, but it wasn't even 2 full weeks because they were attending meetings, so you're trying to capture them in between meetings. But having that structure, of reference points was really, really useful, and key contacts as well, who were like friendly stakeholders, if you like, that if you ran into problems that you could go and speak to was really vital. And then So yeah, absolutely. I think there's one thing that I've taken on board, that if you have to transition a project, you really have to take the time to do that, because it really kind of pays dividends, in terms of continuity.
Excellent, thank you. Ewan has submitted a question. With the data you captured, how important was it to establish a strong information management process to ensure the right quality data was delivered, assessed, and reliable to use now and into the future?
Absolutely, really fundamental. I think if there's one thing that we took away from this project, and in terms of the feedback we got, was the quality of data. A lot of time was spent right from the outset in terms of determining the specification and the data, the quality management plan, essentially, how we were going to check that data, how the suppliers were going to check that data, and actually running audits on that. So one of the things we did throughout the project was undertake spot checks, and they were designed to pick out different quality elements that the kind of suppliers had promised, and checking they were actually doing those activities. So that was really fundamental, and then picking up and reviewing those on an ongoing basis. So it was a fundamental part, definitely, and it was really important to the success of the project as well.
Excellent, thank you. I've been asked by Ashok, was this run in agile, mix, or waterfall for sub-projects?
Because this didn't require any development activity, it was essentially waterfall.
Excellent, thank you. Paul, I'll take this opportunity to welcome you back and bring the session to a close, if I may.
Smashing, thank you, Rob. Yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to Akrim for that really enlightening and very compelling presentation that we've just seen. So that was really good, fantastic. Thank you, Akrim. And I'd also like to thank everybody for taking the time out to hear what Akrim had to say. And hopefully you've all taken something away from Akrim's presentation that you can take back to the workplace and maybe apply in your projects. Okay, so just want to say thank you very much again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evenings, and hopefully I will see you soon at a physical event. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.